traditional unceded territory of the Omami-Ninninuk, known as Algonquin, in what is now named Lanark Highlands. I am grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the lands and waters that sustain life for the diverse peoples, animals, and plants who now share this land. As a builder of the future, I hope these lands and waters continue to support a rich diversity of life. Towards that hope, I commit to providing for this land and its inhabitants as much as they provide for me. I invite anyone to add their name and their own personal acknowledgement in the chat. I would like to thank our sponsors for our convention: Dedel Seeds, the Greenbelt Foundation, Eco Wool, the Organic Council of Ontario, and EcoCert. I would also like to thank our convention partners: the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, Local Food and Farm Co-op, the Fair Finance Fund, Friends of the Golden Horseshoe, the Ignatius Jesuit Center, and Sustain Ontario. We have a slightly different program for this year. AGM and convention will begin tomorrow from 12:15 to 5:30 p.m., followed by social gatherings hosted by various locals. Tonight, we are honored to present our keynote address, Community Land Trusts, A Way Forward, History and Vision from Toronto's Little Jamaica Neighbourhood. Community land trusts are a revolutionary way to reimagine land use and ownership. CLTs are nonprofit corporations created to acquire and hold land for the benefit of a community. First developed by Black farmers in the United States in the 1960s, CLTs promote community ownership and democratic control of land. Today, CLTs have grown to become a proven method to build collective economic power and invest in community well-being. Our keynote address will detail the rich history of community land trusts and the specifics of the foundational work happening in Toronto's Little Jamaica neighborhood to collectively address affordable housing, food insecurity, and economic development through a historic community land trust project. Dane Williams and Romain Baker of Black Urbanism Toronto will join us to share what they've learned in the early stages of the project, how CLTs might offer avenues for urban food sovereignty, and provide a hopeful vision of the future. Romain Baker is co-founder and executive director of Black Urbanism Toronto. Through his formal education in public policy, Romain aims to develop policy solutions at the community level to address some of society's most pressing challenges. Romain has been a resident of Little Jamaica for almost a decade, a neighborhood which has undergone significant development pressure, which threatens to displace over 50 years of Caribbean people's historic presence, cultural institutions, and businesses in the city of Toronto. This prompted the creation of Black Urbanism Toronto to ensure that members of Little Jamaica's Black community were actively engaged in the neighborhood's development. Romain is the Senior Policy and Programs Advisor at the Ontario Ministry of Education. Dane Williams is a dedicated member of the Black Urbanism Toronto team, serving as the Vice Chair and co-founder. Born and raised in Toronto, Dane has a strong connection to Little Jamaica, which was the original landing spot for his family when they arrived in Canada over 50 years ago. Dane's passion for community development began when he was living in Edmonton and joined the executive committee of the Kinsman Club. There, he gained experience in creating initiatives to meet the greatest needs of the community, which fueled his devotion to the nonprofit sector. Now, Dane brings his experience and passion for community development to Black Urbanism Toronto, where he works to enhance the sustainability and vitality of Little Jamaica. Along with his role at Black Urbanism Toronto, Dane currently works at the University of Toronto at the Rotman School of Management as a human resource consultant. Please give a warm welcome to our keynote speakers, Romain and Dane. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you, Max, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Max, for the introduction. And I also want to say a great intro into CLT portion, because that was that's definitely a piece of of our presentation. So great kind of segue into providing guidance on the historical connection to CLTs. All right, Romain, how do you want to start off? I guess we can introduce ourselves, and I'll share my screen because I'll be the one who will be managing the slides. So if you could just let me know if you can see it.
Yep, we're all good. Can everybody else see?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we can jump to the next slide.
Sure.
Thanks, Dane. All right, so Black Urbanism TO, just give a bit of our mission and vision. So our vision is to be a vessel to amplify the soul of Black communities. And what we mean by that is to amplify our voices. Our organization is guided by the principles of people, place, and culture, trust, respect, integrity, partnerships, community, unity, and liberation, agency, and power. Our aim is to increase the participation of Black people in community development to advance the collective cultural, economic, and social interests in the neighborhoods that we call home.
Okay. So just kind of getting into our story, Black Urbanism Toronto, or BUTO, was established in 2018 with a mission to enhance the involvement of Black individuals in community development and further the cultural, economic, and social interests of Black communities in Toronto. More specifically, to Romain's point, the organization was created in response to the negative impacts faced by the once thriving Little Jamaica neighborhood in Eglinton West as a result of the crosstown LRT construction. Now, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of, and we'll show a map of Little Jamaica and kind of the surrounding areas, but Metrolinx came in 2012 and has really disrupted, the business owners. So the disruption caused by the construction led to the displacement of not only residents, but business owners, and a significant decline in the local ecosystem. To raise awareness about the challenges faced by Little Jamaica, Black Urbanism Toronto, myself and Romain, and a colleague of ours who's no longer on the team, Theo, produced a documentary that highlighted the forgotten history of Eglinton West and the erasure of the historical Black spaces. We planned on, using the documentary to shed light on the bleak reality faced by the community and spark the creation of Black Urbanism Toronto. As we were going through kind of the planning and development of the documentary, we actually put a halt to it and stopped to it because we thought that we were basically, capturing displacement, and we wanted to, in turn, actually be, effective cause to actually have community voice and create organizing to really combat the displacement. So since Black Urbanism has, been founded, we've been dedicated to promoting and advancing, empowering and supporting Black communities within the city through advocacy, education, and action. We've been able to address systematic barriers that prevent Black individuals from participating fully in community development and to promote equitable and inclusive urban growth in Toronto. And more specifically with the business owners, they're so focused on kind of like the day-to-day operation of their business. It's really difficult for them to organize and plan, make their voices heard in the appropriate forms. So that kind of ties to Romain's piece as a vessel of community. We use ourselves as mouthpieces for business owners, meeting them in the spaces where they're at, collecting the information, and making sure it's communicated in policy and organized format that's understood and congested, by the different, levels of government. So as you can see, the radius of Little Jamaica. So Little Jamaica is also known as Eglinton West. It's an ethnic enclave in Toronto. It is located along Eglinton Avenue West from Allen Road to Keele Street, and is a part of 4 neighborhoods: Silverthorne, Hill, Belgravia, Caledonia Fairbank, and Oakwood Vaughan. So there is a kind of separate strip here that, houses a majority of, Black Afro-Caribbean businesses as well. And Little Jamaica derived from the West Indian Domestic Scheme. It was an immigration program for Caribbean women between 1955 to 1965. Through the scheme, approximately 3,000 Caribbean women immigrated to Canada to work as domestic workers. Once these women worked for 1 year, they were granted landed immigrant status and became eligible for further educational and work opportunities.
Thanks, Dean. So for a little bit of a historical context, Little Jamaica has been a hub for the Caribbean community for more than 50 years. And the presence of Black peoples in and around this area goes beyond that time period. But we did see an influx of Caribbean migrants, like they mentioned, through the West Indies domestic scheme, also the migrant farm workers program, and in the 70s, when Canada opened up its immigration policies, allowing people from the Caribbean to come and pursue economic opportunities here. And so the Little Jamaica was the area where many of these people settled. If there are any reggae fans in the audience, a little known fact is that Toronto was actually the second largest producer of reggae music throughout the 70s and 80s. Behind Houston, Jamaica. And that's specifically Little Jamaica where these records were being produced. And that's because reggae artists were among this influx of immigrants coming into the city. And that is where they set up shop. So the neighborhood had recording studios, record shops, there were barbershops and salons, restaurants, grocery stores, a variety of services, cultural institutions such as newspapers, churches. It became a very vibrant and bustling part of the city that brought a unique flavor to, to contribute to what Toronto is known for. Yeah, next slide, please. So if you visited Eglinton over the last 10 years, this is what would greet you. Massive barricades and construction, the reconfiguration of the streets. And this had a significant impact on the business owners. In some instances, there were barricades blocking the sidewalks, so foot traffic was completely decimated, and businesses were closing their doors. And so as we were in and around the neighborhood, this is what we saw, especially as they mentioned, when we were looking to capture the neighborhood story, this is what we were seeing. And so we knew that there was, and something needed to be done. And as we spoke with business owners, they were hopeful, but there was no clear end in sight. And there was no real recourse for them to turn to in order to be able to sustain themselves. And so we just saw them closing their doors one after the other.
And Romain, if I can just quickly jump in, I think this kind of sets the tone for, the importance of community ownership, collective ownership, because the lack of ownership in the neighborhood really set the tone in regards to the displacement happening, because there was a lack of foot traffic in business that happened from 2012 onwards. As you know, the access to, revenue, additional revenue streams and foot traffic, and people just wanted to actually, park and access the different shops. It was very difficult. Parking was an issue and a concern as well. Limited parking. Some of the Metrolinx construction workers actually occupied a lot of the side streets and the parking. And with Eglinton being like a pass-through neighborhood, people would stop, park, purchase the goods, Caribbean goods from, grocery stores, from the restaurants, and then kind of jump back in their car and head home. And with the construction on the side of the road and a lot of the parking spots being taken up, it really decimated and stopped that kind of economic engagement and transaction, and which really kind of set the tone. As you can tell, then it was difficult for people to, make rent, pay their rent, but also potentially pay their own, their mortgage or their own residential spaces as well. So, it kind of snowballed from 2012 onward.
Thanks, Dane. So this image that you see on the screen is just a screenshot from the Eglinton Connects planning framework. So as we were engaging with business owners and we learned about this planning framework, we saw that the business owners had no awareness that the city was planning to basically create a right of way for the development of high-rise and mid-rise condos, planning for streetscape redesign in terms of bike lanes and widening the sidewalks, and a number of other public realm improvements. But after the business owners would be, decimated by the construction of the LRT, there was going to be a number of an unknown, length of time that condos will be developed. And so even if businesses were able to survive the construction of the LRT, they would be further impacted by the condo developments. So as we look through this document, Eglinton Connects, we also identified that there was no reference or acknowledgement of neighborhoods like Little Jamaica, which, definitely shows that there was, that these stakeholders were overlooked, they weren't engaged, and that this neighborhood wasn't being planned for adequately to support them and to prevent any kind of displacement. And so we saw that, land use planning was really the area where we needed to intervene to be able to change the conversation as a response to what we were seeing in the neighborhood. And I'll turn it over to Dane to kind of walk through our approach that we took and that we've built into the way how our organization operates.
Thanks, Romain. So in regards to kind of as we were, building out the next steps of engagement and engaging with the business owners, there's something strategically we wanted to think about separating ourselves from, the city, Metrolinx, and how they were able to develop in regards to the planning aspects of their projects. We didn't just want to be another stakeholder within the community that the business owners had to deal with. We wanted to think of an engagement strategy that met them where they were at, took their concerns, and would drive policy change. We didn't just want to be another barrier or another entity that's really, draining, where there wouldn't be any solution. They've been in this state for the past 10, 15 years, and also with complications with the BIAs, so the business improvement area as well. And for us, we wanted to recognize and understand those concerns and be an asset to the business owners as opposed to a liability. So our approach was to convene, identify, and inform, and then drive change. So with Convene, advocate for or create engagement opportunities to increase community participation. So, we first walked through with community in speaking about the housing TO 2020-2030 housing plan. We understood that there were, affordable housing, and there was new development that was happening in the community. And we wanted to identify kind of main concerns from the residents across Little Jamaica and their housing concerns. We then completed a Black Business Conversation two-part consultation series. So back in February 2020, which seems like so long ago, we actually hosted a 2-day consultation series with business owners to really understand the concerns from multiple facets, lack of support from the BIA. We then added a piece around COVID-19 and how it's exacerbated some of their efforts, and then exacerbated the displacement of the business owners. Then we looked at kind of some of the planning elements in the mixed use buildings and potentially how we can envision supporting the Black business owners in the redevelopment of the community. And then we came up with recommendations to each of those pillars and the city as well. And then we hosted Instagram Lives with community leaders. So Josh Matlow, the counselor in the ward, we hosted multiple community engagements and discussions with him in regards to some of the concerns of community and recommendations to the city to ensure that we're really taking into consideration the Black business owners and the residents in community and how that can inform decision-making going forward. And again, spoke to the co-hosting with Josh Matlow. And identify. So a lot of the things that we were, interested in was the data collection, and then identifying systematic barriers, opportunities and policy levers, roles for relevant actors, and provide evidence-based recommendations. So we really want to curate the concerns and understand the concerns of the stakeholders in the community, and then be able to link that to potentially policy changes and things that could be instrumental to change. We didn't just want to collect the data and be unorganized in what our asks were. We, through the information that was provided, we were able to curate specific asks from various stakeholders to activate these changes. I'll pass it over to Romain.
Thanks, Dane. So the third step is inform. As we're working with community, we're co-creating solutions, we're identifying barriers. It is very important for us to report back to community on, what the findings were. So we do that in a number of forms. And, I think one of the greatest ways to have the perspectives of local stakeholders and to be able to drive the policy changes through, publishing reports. And so we've used reports that we've published to engage with city officials as an engagement tool. And, through social media and other channels, we're able to build awareness about these reports and be able to drive, folks to these reports so that they can, gain further understanding. The next slide, please. In driving change. Through these reports, we're able to, provide recommendations on, very specific and clear actions that need to be taken. And in some instances, there are some items that we can lead ourselves, and there are others where we will identify the relevant actors that need to, play a role. And if you look to the right, you can see a screenshot of one of the motions that were passed at City Council in Toronto, and it's titled "Preserving the Past and Protecting the Future of Little Jamaica." And this was introduced by Councillor Josh Matlow. And this motion came out of one of our recommendations, which was to develop an economic development and planning framework for Little Jamaica that, recognizes barriers and challenges, acknowledged its significance in the city, and, that would implement measures to mitigate its displacement and ensure that it can thrive going into the future. Because we knew that the development was coming, it is inevitable, but I think we can develop in a very intentional way so that, neighborhoods of significance can continue to reside there and that the essence of this community can continue to thrive. And so this is one of the direct results of, how we were able to drive change. And so we'll work in collaboration with community members to implement recommendations and respond to local needs. And we direct attention to key opportunities. So, that report that we were able to develop through the Black Business Consultation, it continues to be relevant today. And we continue to use it to engage with community partners, other local actors, and politicians.
Yeah, thanks, Romain. And just to kind of quickly add, before this report and before this, past motion, Little Jamaica wasn't officially recognized by the city of Toronto. So just imagine that it's been in operation since 1950s. And, knowing that there have been other areas in the city that officially recognized as cultural kind of districts per se, pushing forward this Black business report and this motion created the distinction, the official distinction of Little Jamaica through this motion.
So on this slide, this is a vision for the future. And this came about through our engagement with the Black business owners, where we asked them about their vision for the future of this neighborhood and how the culture could be, represented in the public realm. And so we worked with an architect and designer to come up with this very diagrammatic model, but it just really, I think, contrasts with the images that we found in the Eglinton Connects planning framework document, where there was no cultural representation in how the future of this neighborhood would look. And so you can see very these things might seem small, but they're pretty significant. There's a space there where you can see the trees. There's some like structures there that could house small or pop-up businesses. That is actually the site of where Reggae Lane is, and it is a Green Pea parking lot, which has become the site of a weekly farmers market in the summer. So you can already see that some of these things that came about through that engagement is already coming to fruition. There's a crosswalk with the red, green, and gold. Those are very typical colors that you find in the flags of various African nations. And there's some culturally significant people that are here. And it's this was just to I guess get our eyes and our ideas flowing. And since then, there have been quite a few mock-ups of what the neighborhood could look like done by various organizations. But I think this is very important because you can't achieve something unless you can see it. And this was a first step in being able to visualize and see what the future of this neighborhood could look like.
Thanks, Romain. I'll jump into the next section. So just wanted to show some of the work that we've completed. So, and we just understand the impact of, participating in fairness and economic democracy. And so we've, tailored our approach to support the business owners. We understand without the business owners, then, for us, it's foundationally important that the business owners are in operation, because that's where the transaction of people peer-to-peer people engagement happens. That's where there's a transfer of culture. It's natural when we're all participating in each other's culture. So that's why we've really identified and honed in on the business owners and trying to really speak to the policies currently right now that are barrier to entries for these business owners to participate in. So we looked at the waiver, supplier diversity certification fees, and just understanding from a procurement process the difficulties of these business owners to participate on that level with the entry fees. That was a report we did in partnership with the University of Toronto, the geography planning department. And then as well, this is front facing of our Black Business Conversation report. And Romain spoke to some of the work as well. And I'll be sure to pass along the PDF version of the Black Business Report just to kind of see, holistically some of the stuff that we're able to do. And maybe it's potentially of service for future, if there's opportunity for other individuals to build out some of those recommendations and policies that are applicable to you. It may be a good kind of position to start from. So we'll definitely send it over just for everyone to get a review of it. So just to Romain's point, these were some of the report recommendations that we highlighted in the Black Business Report. So we looked for financial compensation paid directly to business owner for the construction impacts, just taking into consideration the 10 to 12 plus years that they had to remain idle with lack of street traffic due to the construction. Developing economic development and planning framework study for Little Jamaica. And then I think this is the main important one that we identified that's in collaboration with the CLT, is identify the barriers and opportunities to property ownership by Black business owners in Little Jamaica. We understood that the lack of ownership really put them in a difficult place to be able to speak on their own behalf and kind of move in lockstep with the redevelopment that was happening in Little Jamaica. because they weren't owners of their own properties, essentially they were looked upon as collateral damage and didn't really have a say at all in what was happening in the neighborhood. And for us, we've looked, that was an important thing to look at, to say, to Romain's point, how can we within our community not wait hand and foot on city, provincial, or federal governments? How can we activate change within our own community and be the activators of change? And then finally, the implementation of aggressive zoning policy. So we understood that within the new developments, there would potentially the retail spaces, the restaurants, the mom and pop businesses, they may be zoned out based off the larger commercial spaces. So one of the things that as a community we wanted to have as a collective ask was to ensure that the developers were building appropriately to take those things into consideration. Because again, we didn't want generic big box stores to now move in. Once the kind of redevelopment has been finalized, we wanted to have the opportunities for a lot of these mom and pop shops to be able to have space that fit with their business models. So commercial displacement prevention strategies. So we worked with the U of T master's students to identify prevention strategies under the following umbrella. So planning policy, cultural heritage, retention strategies, and community land trusts. So every year, second year Masters of Science in Planning students are able to work with potential clients on a research project, and we were selected as one of those clients. And they were able to provide us with recommendations on the change in Little Jamaica and exploring commercial prevention strategies to create a new vision for community control in the face of growth and transit-oriented development. The report provided an overview of the opportunities and challenges presented by the planning policy framework and evaluate several anti-displacement strategies related to cultural heritage prevention, retaining Black-owned businesses, increasing property ownership, and potentially establishing a commercial community land trust. The students were able to provide us feedback on how we can implement these strategies from the various umbrellas that I had provided previously. So now we're getting into why we're here and kind of some of the work that we're now doing. So community land trusts. So just to kind of provide a basic understanding of community land trusts, they are community-based, non-for-profit, non-governmental organizations aimed at securing long-term affordability and community control over space by removing land from the speculative market and gentrification pressures. CLTs acquire land through purchases or donations and are held in perpetuity for various community needs, whether that be housing, urban agriculture, commercial space, cultural uses, or others. Community land trusts operate within a defined geographical boundary and are guided by and accountable to the people who live and work and play within the area. Each community land trust can be unique as it responds to the distinct needs of its community. There are different variations in how CLTs are structured, how they choose their land, and how their stewardship is operationalized. But however, the main premise is that it operates in the interest of their community members. And the most important thing, again, is that it's removing land from the speculative market and expanding the benefits of the ownerships. So, there are different ways to structure community land trust, and each model, each is distinct, and therefore it's not a one size fits all. We'll get into the specifics and the nuances of the CLT, but we just wanted to kind of highlight that really, even within Toronto, there's various models that are being rolled out that are different and are based off the needs of community. And we'll be able to speak more in depth on some of the preliminary findings within Little Jamaica. So just to kind of highlight, I just wanted to highlight, quickly some of the historical background. So CLTs are rooted in the Black resistance and continue to be used as a tool for Black communities to build community wealth, resisting racial planning and the forces of gentrification. The founders had so specifically within the New Communities, Inc., The founders had come to believe that one of the key ways to secure political and economic freedom was for their people to own their own land, to provide a safe haven for Black farmers. New Communities was found in 1969 as a farm collective on 5,735 acres in Georgia, and became one of the original models for community land trusts in the United States. The vision for land was to become fully self-sufficient. Despite personal, cultural, and institutionalized discrimination, New Communities acted on that vision through the 1970s. They eventually would farm over 1,800 acres and operate a farmer's market and greenhouse. So just wanted to kind of also touch base on some of the history within Canada when it comes to the land trusts. So land trust in Canada is rooted in, colonization of Indigenous peoples, the conservation and wilderness presentations movement, where Canadian land trust originated, is grounded in the concept of no one's land. It depicted the Indigenous ideologies of it being nobody's land, as savage, uncivilized, and lacking a sense of territory and system of governance. This concept erasing the histories of Indigenous communities and justifying the stealing of land by defining it as wild or vacant. So Indigenous communities and First Nations across Canada had practiced land stewardship and other community-based land-centered practices for centuries and long before the emergencies of land trusts. Now, more specifically in Canada, Canada's earliest urban CLT operated as an independent land trust initiative through cooperative housing organizing, and was a response to increasing of housing affordability challenges. Most recently, CLTs have emerged against a backdrop of decades of government withdrawal from the funding and delivery of social housing programs, financial cutbacks, and rising costs of private sector housing. Specifically in Toronto, it began in 2012 in response to increased gentrification and result of renewed interest in creating long-term affordable housing, particularly in Vancouver and Toronto. So land trusts that are currently operating in Toronto are Parkdale and Kensington Land Trusts. So Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust is a non-for-profit community land trust in Parkdale that's led by a group of residents and organizations trying to protect their social, cultural, economic diversity in Parkdale by refining how land is used and developed. Through community land trust model, Parkdale Land Trust owns land and assures it is used to meet the needs of community by leasing it to non-for-profit partners who can provide affordable housing, furnished spaces for social enterprises and nonprofit organization, and offer urban agriculture and open space. So Parkdale is currently run by the board of directors that has been elected by their members and consists of residents and representatives of local organizations that represent the diversity of Parkdale. So Parkdale was actually able to, they do have a community farm. They were able to work with the local church, I believe, and, purchase a property, and they do, host a farmer's market. And so as you can see, they've also identified food security as well, issues as well, and rolling out their model and land trusts. So land trusts, a lot of the times is kind of traditionally being thought of, and it's tied to, affordable housing, which is definitely true. But what we look at land trust is an opportunity for community to hold space and really redefine the service offerings within their community. So, one issue of concern would be affordable housing, which then they would, look to acquire existing, physical properties and, ensure that there's some form of rent control in these residential spaces. But we're now starting to see the formation of, addressing food sovereignty. Again, with Black Urbanism in Toronto, we were, really the first in looking at, commercial land trusts and supporting business owners as well. And there are various different models, again, within that can be established that really looks at, community service offerings again, and, what programs and services can be attached to the CLT to ensure that community has the proper resources to support the residents, because and neighborhood, because again, affordable housing is just really one kind of key element. There's other, as we know, as we're moving, and there's more talk about issues with supply chains and food insecurity issues. It's really looking at how we can retain these lands to then be able to ensure that we are having the appropriate offerings within community, and we're actually also the ones that are in charge of setting the costs of the goods and services as we're seeing currently, and making sure that there is an importance of making profits, but the core of the service offering is to provide services to community to ensure that a community is able to thrive and live an adequate and appropriate life. And then beside Parkdale is Kensington Market Community Land Trust. So it is a community-based non-for-profit corporation. They were formed through years of neighborhood-wide planning, co-development, and community-led design, and incorporated in 2017. And this is the importance of understanding policy and kind of some of the policies that you're able to leverage. And Parkdale and Kensington have been great at leveraging Section 37 of the Planning Act, and being able to request funding at the municipal level from their counselors, and Section 37 is tied to planning dollars. So if there's redevelopment that's happening in the community under Section 37, it did end September 2022. But within Section 37, based on the amount of development that's happening within your community, within your ward, the developers did have to provide a cash contribution to the counselor of that ward, and they're able to redistribute the funding as they saw fit. Parkdale and Kensington were able to leverage those monies to be able to buy back and purchase their property. So Parkdale bought its first 15-unit rooming house in the West End of Toronto neighborhood back in 2019. It was at that point one of the very few community land trusts operating in Canada. And then less than 4 years later, Parkdale now is a steward of 84 properties encompassing 205 rental units across Toronto's West End. And more specifically with Kensington Market, they were able to purchase a 13 residential unit building, and their counselor had provided them $3 million to buy, renovate, and operate the building at 5456 Kensington Avenue as well, and offer affordable housing for at least 99 years. So, and with Parkdale, again, they were combating a kind of a redevelopment, but also no ghost hotels. So they had Airbnb, kind of pop up, and those service offerings was what really kind of jump kicking and kickstarted some of their displacement as well. And they wanted to combat that through affordable housing alternatives and being able to ensure that when property did go on the speculative market, that they were able to purchase and then hold that land within community. So this jumps to our pathways to community ownership. So kind of through the work we did through the Black Business Report, and then also the placekeeping report with the UFT students, we were able to jump kick and upstart our pathways to community ownership project. So, as we've been saying, independent Black retailers face economic systematic barriers to access financing from traditional lenders and government rent-to-own programs. It was imperative to bridge this gap by securing affordable commercial spaces long-term. The purpose of this project was to increase property ownership for small businesses, serving the needs of low-income residents in Little Jamaica through wealth building models such as community land trusts. In the project, we looked to create a locally designed economic democracy curriculum to explore community control and ownership models that would best fit community. So, the priorities that we had were increase awareness of Black owners in Toronto to local actors, build a strong connection to constituency that increases understanding of local needs and priorities for low income, assessing the viability of the community land trust model from a community perspective, increase awareness and understanding of alternative models such as potentially land trusts or other culturally relevant pathways to ownership, and community wealth building models. So commercial land trusts are just, one, and traditional commercial land trusts are just, one specific models, but there are also, community capital funds. There are also potentially, REICs, so real estate investment cooperatives. There are also kind of limited CLTs. And then, with the community capital fund, we'd be potentially looking at offering bonds that would allow community to actually participate in fractional ownership and then be able to receive a potential dividends at the end, and or have their, kind of their dividends and their ownership stakes rolled into purchasing additional available buildings. So we didn't want to just look at, for instance, leveraging city, funding and dollars to be able to then purchase building and hold it in community. When we consulting with business owners and residents, there was a real interest in ownership and having equity and stake. So for us, we are looking at multiple models to actually, live within the multiple different wealth building models that we can definitely roll out. So we're not looking at a traditional kind of, standardized CLT. We're also looking at ones that allow people to have fractional ownership, because as we've been able to speak to it throughout the presentation, that has been a real concern and issue for business owners is the barrier to entry, and actually be able to own their own space or have, a fractional ownership, because equity within our community has been something difficult to acquire. It was something that they had noted that they were interested in participating in. So pathways to community ownership engagement strategy. So, I kind of spoke to this, but to include as many voices as possible in this important conversation about economic prosperity in Little Jamaica, the Community Pathways to Ownership project, we incorporated community engagement as a key element of the project. And we conducted extensive research to outreach the business owners and hosted several engagement activities designed to give current and future community members and stakeholders an opportunity to provide meaningful input. Some of the most important things were to gather community perspective, assess best ownership models for businesses, assess the level of interest for the formation and maintenance of the CLT, and then contribute towards the development of a locally designed economic democracy curriculum to explore the community control and ownership models that, could affect Black business owners and surrounding community. And again, for us, the most important thing was to have the appropriate engagement. We did have an advisory committee of business owners who worked lockstep with us to kind of speak to and ensure that the way we were framing and building out the pathways to community ownership model was in sync of, collective business owners' interests. And then we, again, had community outreach, and because the business owners were working, we met them where they were at. So, we made sure that we were going into their business owners, serving, having conversations. And then at the end, we had a community engagement within our office, where we were able to host people in person as well virtually to kind of get consensus and go through each individual model in lockstep. I'll pass it over to Romain.
Thanks, Dane. So if you remember that that motion that was passed at Toronto City Council, as a result of that motion, the city hired a consultant to develop the Little Jamaica Cultural District Plan. And so this plan will be looking at things from housing, mobility, parks and public realm, looking at the commercial businesses and different provisions that could be provided to support them. And we see the Little Jamaica Community Land Trust as being an integral part of that future cultural district to provide the sustainability and stability for the business owners. Because as we mentioned earlier, the city pretty much gave a right of way for the development of mid-rise and high-rise condos. And there's a whole, like, slew of development and that's going to be taking place. And so these businesses aren't out of the woods yet. And so the community land trust will essentially be able to mitigate a lot of the impact that we're going to see in the future. As they mentioned, the CLT also allows for, like, broad community planning to respond to, the various needs. And so those include affordable housing, economic development, and food sovereignty. And the food sovereignty is one of the pieces that are definitely a priority for us. And one of the things that we are looking at is, like, in the Little Jamaica neighborhood, especially along the commercial corridor, there really isn't a lot of, land for us to be able to grow food, definitely in and around the area. So there's a lot of exploration that still needs to take place there. But one of the things that we envision, and in response to community feedback that we received through some engagements, is the need for a food co-op. And so we see, like, a possible food co-op being housed on land owned and operated by the CLT, and looking at the food supply chain and how we can build those relationships to provide affordable food to this part of the city. Next slide, please.
Sure. Oh, give me a second. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and so that concludes our presentation. Please feel free to follow us through social media, visiting our website, or emailing us directly for continuing this conversation.